Hello, and welcome to this packed video screencast on Dart programming. In this section, you will be shown how to initialize and use timer objects in Dart to control timed events. You will also learn how to use timers for continuous animations. You will also be introduced to Dart's random number generator, and you will learn how to use it to make the food animations more interesting. In this video, we will be covering the initial implementation of the worm food. Specifically, we will be discussing the basic class for the worm food object, the CSS for the worm food, and adding worm food to the board using its constructor. As you will recall from the last video section, we can dynamically add elements to the DOM using the append or element.children.add methods. If you don't already have it open, switch to the Dart editor. First, let's add a quick food object to the board. By adding it statically, we can work on the style and get that right before we move on and add food dynamically. Okay, great. Now let's open the main.css file and start adding a basic style for the food. Let's start by making the food 20 by 20 with an absolute position and make sure that that color is blue. Now that that is in, let's run the project and see what the food looks like. Okay, great. But now we want to do something a bit more advanced. Since we won't have just one piece of food on the screen at a time, we want to have different food items appear differently depending on the order that they were added to the DOM. To accomplish this, we will use a special CSS selector called the nth-of-type. Let's take a look. Now each multiple of 3 will get a different color. This will add more flair to our game. Alright, let's run what we have and see what it looks like. As you can see, the 3 food items are now completely different colors. This is exactly what we were going for. Okay, so now let's remove the static food elements and switch over to our worm.dart file. At the top of our worm.dart file, let's add a new line that specifies that this is now part of a library called wormgame. Next, let's create a new file called food.dart. This file will hold the food class that we will use to encapsulate our food objects and make them simpler to use. Now, since this is part of the worm game, we will use the part of keyword to specify that. Next, let's create a class for our food. We want our food items to be given a specific x and y coordinate when they are created, so we will take in those parameters using the constructor. As you can see, I started the class variables with an underscore character. This is how we specify that these are private to the class. Notice that we are using the x and y coordinates to manipulate the style's top and left attributes. We are also setting the initial opacity to 0, so that the element is hidden. You'll see why later when we talk about the timers. Now, let's add some methods to this class that will help us manipulate the food objects on the screen. We need some way to see the element, so we will create show and hide methods to adjust the opacity. Next, we need some way to move the object after it's been added to the screen. This will prevent us from wasting resources creating and destroying objects in memory. Finally, we need some way to access the attributes on this food item, whether it's visible or not to the user. Okay, now let's go back to our worm file and add some new food objects dynamically to the screen. To do this, we're going to create new food objects in a loop and append them to the board. As you can see, we now have a nice object-oriented wrapper around our food objects, and we can add them to the screen with very little effort. Let's go ahead and run this project and confirm our results. In the next video, we will be covering the random object provided by Dart for generating pseudo-random numbers. Thank you very much for watching.